It's funny. When you lay a concrete foundation for a house, it dries, and then you never really look at it again.
Right. Yeah, it's just there.
Yeah, exactly. We like our foundations to be completely invisible. Like we want them uncomplicated. They just carry the weight of the house without ever demanding our attention.
Yeah.
But you turn to the very first page of the Bible, that foundation isn't dry concrete at all.
No, not even close.
It is this murky, chaotic, just intensely human landscape. So today we are doing a deep dive into the book of Genesis. And we're not looking at it as some, felt board Sunday school story, but really as the master blueprint for why human nature is so incredibly broken right now and what the creator is actually doing about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to know why a really complex engine is making this terrible grinding noise, you have to go look at the manufacturer's original schematic.
Right. You have to open the manual.
Yeah, exactly. And Genesis is that schematic. It's messy, it's beautiful, and it sets the trajectory for absolutely everything that follows in our faith. Like, it really forces us to confront our own reflection in these super ancient texts.
It really does. And to read that schematic correctly, I feel like we have to recognize what kind of document we're even holding. Because it is so easy to open Genesis and just, try to force it to be a modern science textbook.
Oh, yeah. Happens all the time.
Or like a really sterile historical timeline. But the original language actually gives us this massive clue about its true purpose. Like the word Genesis itself just comes from the Greek translation, meaning birth or generation.
Which is a beautiful thematic title, honestly. But the original Hebrew title is even more striking, I think. In Hebrew, the book is called Bereshit, which literally just means in the beginning.
In the beginning.
Right. It's the very first word of the scroll. And it signals that we are stepping into this massive, sweeping narrative arc. And the way that arc is structured is just brilliant. It's built in two very distinct parts, and they're connected by a specific hinge.
Yeah, I always picture it like a camera lens. Like for the first 11 chapters, that lens is pulled all the way back.
Way, way back.
Right? It's capturing the whole cosmos, the origins of humanity, the birth of all these nations, and just the terrifying scale of global corruption. But then you hit chapter 12, and the lens suddenly zooms in so close, it almost feels claustrophobic.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
The fate of the entire universe is suddenly pinned on one deeply flawed, just incredibly dysfunctional family living in a tent in the Middle East, and we follow them for the rest of the book.
And the theological implications of that camera shift are just staggering, because God is the sovereign creator of the cosmos, but his rescue plan for that entire universe doesn't rely on these sweeping, impersonal cosmic forces. It relies on deeply personal, painfully intimate relationships with really compromised people. And that is like the core theme running through the entire biblical narrative. Out of disorder, out of chaos and darkness, God creates order and beauty and goodness. He hands us a world where life can totally flourish.
Yeah, we just ruin it.
Yeah. Humans, starting right there in the garden and continuing right up to, I don't know, whatever you were doing yesterday afternoon.
Guilty.
We just continually mess it up by choosing our own way.
But the wild thing is, God just flat out refuses to abandon his creation.
Yeah.
Like he stays in the mess. So to understand why the world we are walking through today is so fraught with, pain and anxiety and conflict, we really have to look at how it was originally designed to function.
Right.
We have to look at the original design of the cosmos, which starts in Genesis 1 with the very nature of God himself. Okay, let's unpack this because this is where it gets really good.
It does, because Genesis doesn't give us some abstract philosophical argument for God's existence. It simply introduces him in action. And it introduces him by his personal name, Yahweh.
Which is such a specific choice.
It is. It's this ancient Hebrew form of the verb he will be. And it appears, get this, over 6,500 times in the Hebrew Bible.
Over 6,500 times. I mean, that repetition alone means the authors are basically begging us to pay attention to his identity.
Exactly. And historically, the Jewish community held this name in such incredible awe that they developed a practice of never actually saying it out loud. They didn't want to risk taking it in vain.
Right. Out of deep reverence.
Yeah. So when reading the scriptures, they would substitute the word Adonai, which means Lord. And later, when they were translating the Hebrew Bible into Greek, they used Kyrios, the Greek word for Lord. So if you are sitting in your living room reading your English Bible today, and you see the word Lord spelled out in all capital letters, you are looking at the personal covenant name of the God of Israel.
And I feel like that transforms how you read a passage. It's not just some generic deity in the sky, It's deeply relational being. And Genesis 1 leans so heavily into that relational nature. Like God says, let us make humanity in our image.
Yes, the plural pronouns.
Right. He uses us and our. It's this incredible glimpse right out of the gate into the reality that God exists in a diversity of persons, perfectly united in one relational essence. The
Right.
Creator is fundamentally a community of love.
And it's out of that overflowing community of love that God speaks order into the dark, watery chaos. And Genesis 1 is highly, highly structured. God establishes these realms, right? The sky, the sea, the land. And then he fills those realms with
The
rulers.
sun and moon, fish and birds.
Exactly, the animals and humans. And this all happens over a framework of 7 days.
And man, I feel like those 7 days are where a lot of modern readers just get completely bogged down in debates that miss the ancient point entirely.
Oh, 100%. In ancient Hebrew culture, the word for 7, Sheba, it isn't just a unit of time on a clock. It communicates this profound sense of wholeness, of completion and perfection. To an ancient reader, a 7-day creation account reads exactly like the inauguration of a temple.
Oh, wow. A temple.
Yeah. By resting on the 7th day, God is taking up residence in his cosmic temple. He is basically saying, this system is complete. The machinery works perfectly.
Okay, wait. I want to push back on that word perfectly for a second. Because I think there is a massive misconception here that really trips us up in our everyday faith.
Right.
We look back at Eden and we tend to think God made a 100% finished, flawless world where humans were just supposed to sit on a pristine lawn and like do absolutely nothing forever.
Right, like a permanent vacation.
Exactly. But if God created everything perfectly, why on earth did humans have a job? Why do they have to cultivate a garden if it was already perfect?
That is the essential distinction right there. The Bible repeatedly calls creation good. God looks at the light, the land, the creatures, and says, it is good, it functions exactly as it should, but the text never actually uses the word perfect in the sense of being static or totally finished.
So it wasn't a museum exhibit.
No, not at all. He designed a world brimming with untamed, raw potential.
Untamed potential. Man, that changes everything about how we view our purpose.
It really does. When God makes humans, the Hebrew word there is Adam, he makes them in his image. And you have to understand, in the ancient Near East, kings would place physical statues, literally images of themselves, in the far reaches of their empires to represent their authority.
So people knew who was in charge.
Exactly. But God doesn't make a stone statue. He makes living, breathing humans to be his representatives. He appoints humanity to rule his good world on his behalf. Our job is to harness that untamed potential, cultivate the land, build societies, and make the world a place where life can just multiply and flourish.
Which completely elevates the mundane parts of our lives, like raising kids, writing software, running a business, painting a canvas. It is all participation in that original mandate to cultivate potential. God is inviting us to be co-creators with him.
And this whole massive project was supposed to start in the Garden of Eden. And people always, they try to find Eden on a map because the text mentions rivers like the Tigris and Euphrates.
Right, they're looking for GPS coordinates.
Yeah, but focusing on the geography completely misses the theology, doesn't it?
Yeah, it misses the entire point of the imagery. Because in biblical literature, Eden represents the ultimate reality where heaven and earth are perfectly united. It is like the Holy of Holies, the place where God and humans dwell together in just perfect intimacy. And it is a reality that we were meant to expand outward into the rest of that untamed world.
But then, of course, we hit the tension, the breaking point.
Right.
God has given humanity this incredible dignity, this massive role as co-rulers, but he also gives them a choice. And that choice is physically represented by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Up until this point, God has been the one defining what is tov, what is good.
Because he's the creator.
Right. But he doesn't want mindless robots. So he gives humanity the freedom to choose whether they will trust his definition of good and evil or whether they will seize autonomy and try to define it for themselves.
And to rebel against the author of life is, like, by definition, to embrace death.
Mm-hmm.
It is literally disconnecting yourself from the power source. And at this hyper-vulnerable moment of choice, this really mysterious figure enters the narrative, the snake.
Yeah, the snake.
And the text doesn't give us this sprawling backstory for the snake. It just introduces a creature that is in active rebellion against God, and its singular goal is to drag humanity into that exact same rebellion.
And the mechanism the snake uses is terrifying because it's just so subtle. It doesn't use physical force. It uses twisted truth. It actively questions God's motives. It says, Did God really say you would die? No. God knows that when you eat it, you will become like God.
Which is just the heartbreaking irony there, is that they were already made in God's image. They were already like him.
Exactly. The snake convinces them that God is this tyrant who is holding out on them. It completely preys on the fear of missing out. The core lie is that true freedom is found in complete autonomy, in being your own God, calling your own shots.
It's the ultimate tragedy of arrogance. It honestly reminds me of like buying a massive piece of complex furniture. You lug this huge IKEA box home, and the creator of the furniture has painstakingly written an instruction manual for how the pieces are supposed to fit together.
Right, with all the little diagrams.
Yeah. But you open the box and arrogance sets in, and you think, I don't need this manual. I know better. I can figure this out. So you throw it away and you just start forcing pieces together. And at first, you might feel like a master builder. But eventually the table wobbles, the drawers won't close, and you have like a handful of leftover screws.
And you've lost the little Allen wrench.
Yeah, exactly. You thought your autonomy was freedom, but it actually just broke the design.
That is exactly what happens in Genesis 3. By throwing away God's instruction manual for reality, humanity completely breaks the design of the world. And the text shows us the catastrophic chain reaction, like instantly.
Instantly.
The very first casualty is human intimacy. The man and woman look at each other, and for the very first time in human history, they feel shame. They feel vulnerable. They realize they can't trust each other not to exploit them, so what do? They sew fig leaves together. They literally build physical and emotional walls.
And immediately after that, their intimacy with God shatters. When they hear God walking in the garden, they run and they hide in the bushes. And the conversation that follows is just a masterclass in human dysfunction.
Oh, it really is.
God confronts them, and the blame shifting starts immediately. The man blames the woman, and he even throws God under the bus while he's at it. He says, the woman you put here with me.
Yeah, it's your fault, God.
Right. And then the woman blames the snake. The unity is just completely gone.
And then the storytelling shifts into these really profound, tragic poems where God lays out the natural consequences of their rebellion. The ground is cursed. Work, which was supposed to be a joy, will now be fraught with thorns and sweat. Childbirth and family dynamics will be marred by pain and power struggles.
It's all broken.
All of it. And it all leads to the ultimate consequence. A return to the dust. Death. We live in a good world gone bad strictly because of our collective demand for autonomy.
But the absolute brilliance of Genesis is that God doesn't just hand down a sentence and walk away. Tucked right into the middle of the tragedy, in Genesis 3.15, is this mysterious promise. It's often called the proto-evangelium, the first gospel.
Yeah. God turns to the snake and curses it, declaring that its victory is just an illusion. He promises that one day a seed, a descendant of the woman, will come. And this descendant will deliver a lethal, crushing strike to the snake's head, completely destroying evil at its source.
But it comes at a cost, right?
A tremendous cost. In the process of crushing the head, the snake will strike the descendant's heel.
The wounded victor. It is such a stunning paradox. God guarantees the defeat of evil, but he acknowledges the collateral damage it will take to actually accomplish it. Humanity has just burned the house down, and God immediately promises to step into the flames to pull them out.
It's amazing.
Right.
But before that rescue happens, the text shows us just how fast those flames spread. When humanity tosses out the manual, the downward spiral is terrifyingly rapid. Like we leave the garden and watch the fallout ripple through the generations in chapters 3 through 11.
It escalates from, eating a piece of fruit to cold-blooded murder in a single generation.
Yeah.
We meet Cain and Abel. Cain is a farmer. Abel is a shepherd. They both bring offerings to God, but God favors Abel's. And we don't get all the technical behind-the-scenes reasons why, but we do see Cain's reaction. He's just consumed by envy.
And God actually approaches Cain with a warning. He says, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it.
And look at the linguistic connection there. God describes sin as a wild animal, like a predator crouching at the door just waiting to devour. It echoes the snake in the garden so perfectly.
It does. Cain is standing at his own personal tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He has a choice right there. Trust God or seize autonomy. And he chooses autonomy. He lures his own brother into a field and murders him.
And the punishment is exile. Cain is driven further east, further away from the presence of God. But what does he do in exile? He doesn't repent. He decides to build a city.
And we really have to understand what a city meant in the ancient mindset. This isn't just a nice collection of houses with a coffee shop. Cain is building a fortress. He is trying to manufacture his own security, his own Eden, without God.
Right. He's taking control.
Exactly. And the culture of that city rapidly degenerates. Just a few generations later, we meet a man named Lamech, who basically becomes the poster child for human depravity.
Oh man, Lamech is chilling. He is the first man in the Bible to take more than one wife, literally accumulating women like property.
Mm.
And then he writes a poem. It's this twisted, boastful song to his wives where he brags about his capacity for violence. He says, "I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times."
Lamech has completely institutionalized vengeance. He's taken the role of the image of God, which, remember, was meant to cultivate life, and he's weaponized it to cultivate fear and death. The exponential math of his revenge, 77 times, it just shows how deeply the infection has spread.
And that infection reaches a total boiling point in Genesis 6, which introduces one of the most bizarre passages in our Bibles, the sons of God and the Nephilim. I mean, when you read this, it feels like an ancient sci-fi script just got dropped into the middle of the text.
It really does, and it's a highly debated text. It says, "The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, took them as wives, and produced the Nephilim, these heroes of old, men of renown."
Right.
There are several ways scholars read this. Some see it as fallen angelic beings crossing a cosmic boundary, mating with humans to completely corrupt the bloodline. Others read it through an ancient Near Eastern political lens, seeing the sons of God as tyrannical kings who claimed divine descent, and they were violently accumulating massive harems and building oppressive empires, much like Lamech did.
But regardless of which interpretation you lean toward, the narrative function is totally identical. The boundaries of God's good creation are being entirely obliterated. Humanity, whether they're influenced by dark spiritual forces or just their own unchecked ambition, has saturated the earth with violence and corruption.
The earth is ruined. And this leads to the flood narrative. Now, we often sanitize this story, with cute nursery wallpaper and little boats with giraffes poking out.
Right, the Fisher-Price toy version.
Exactly. But it is an apocalyptic tragedy. The text says God saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time.
But the crucial detail there is God's emotional state. He isn't throwing a divine temper tantrum. The text actually says God was deeply troubled, and his heart was filled with pain. He is broken with grief over what humans are doing to each other and to his beautiful world.
The flood is not an act of unpredictable rage. It is an act of uncreation. God is allowing the chaotic waters of Genesis 1, which he originally separated to create dry land, to just collapse back in on the world. It is a severe, devastating mercy, washing away the violence to protect the core goodness of creation from just total annihilation.
But God preserves a remnant.
Yeah.
He protects one righteous man, Noah, along with his family and a remnant of the animals in an ark. And eventually the waters recede, the ark lands, and the world is washed clean. God steps back in and essentially hits the restart button.
Right.
He commissions Noah with the exact same mandate he gave Adam and Eve: be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So Noah is positioned as this new Adam, and as a reader, you were just holding your breath, hoping they get it right this time.
But the deep, unsettling truth of the text is that while the flood washed the earth, it could not wash the human heart. The inclination toward autonomy survived the flood inside the ark, and we see it immediately.
You really do.
The new Adam plants a vineyard, which is a new garden, essentially. And in this garden, Noah gets completely drunk, loses his senses, and lies naked in his tent. And then his son, Ham, commits a shameful act against him.
We are right back in Eden. The nakedness, the shame, the fractured family dynamic. The problem is internal. It's not environmental. And this internal corruption scales up massively in the final story of this macro section, which is the Tower of Babel.
What's fascinating here is how Babel represents the pinnacle of human rebellion organized on a societal scale. The people settle in a plain in Shinar, which is ancient Mesopotamia, and they invent a new technology, the brick.
Which, that sounds completely mundane to us today. But you have to explain the mechanism here. Why does the brick change the sociology of humanity?
Because before the brick, if you wanted to build something massive, you needed stone, which meant you had to live near mountains. But a baked brick means you can artificially manufacture stone anywhere. You can build in flat plains. It liberates humanity from geographical constraints and allows them to centralize massive amounts of wealth and power in one location.
And what do they do with this new technology? Instead of spreading out and cultivating the earth as God commanded them to do, they congregate. They say, "Let us build a city and a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves."
It is the ultimate arrogant bypass. A tower reaching to the heavens, a ziggurat, is essentially an artificial mountain. They are trying to force heaven and earth back together on their own terms using their own technology. They want the glory, the great name, and the divine access, but they want it completely without submitting to the Creator.
God is watching this empire build a monument to its own ego. And the theological irony here is just brilliant. They were building this massive tower to reach the heavens, and the text says God has to come down just to see it.
Right. It's a profound mocking of human pride.
It really is. So God intervenes, confuses their language, and scatters them across the earth.
It stops the centralization of power, but it leaves humanity completely fractured and alienated from each other. The whole first section of Genesis, from the garden to Cain's murder to Lamech's revenge to the flood to Babel, is just a relentless drumbeat of human failure. We are utterly incapable of fixing the mess we made.
But God is about to do something entirely counterintuitive to address the wreckage of Babel. He's going to initiate a rescue plan through one obscure man. But as we sit here looking at humanity scattered and broken, I want to pause and ask you, the listener, to weigh in on this.
Yeah, we'd love to hear this.
If you are watching this deep dive on YouTube, drop a comment below right now. Which of these early catastrophes, the choice in the garden, the descent of Lamech, the flood, or the arrogance of Babel, do you think mirrors our modern culture the most? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're there, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our deep dives into the Word. So getting back to it, humanity is just trying to build a monumental tower to make a great name for themselves, and they ended up totally scattered and confused. Then we turn the page to chapter 12, and the narrative lens zooms all the way in.
Right in.
God approaches a completely random, aging man in Mesopotamia named Abram, who was later known as Abraham, and God offers to freely give him the very thing the builders of Babel tried to steal.
This is the hinge of the entire biblical narrative. Genesis 12:1-3 sets the master trajectory for all of redemptive history. God calls Abraham to leave his country, his people, and his father's household and go to an unknown land. And God makes him a profound promise. He says, "I will make you into a great nation, I will bless you, and I will make your name great."
But the genius is in the final clause of that promise. God isn't blessing Abraham just to give him a comfortable, wealthy life. The blessing is a vehicle.
Exactly. The promise concludes with, "And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." This is God's answer to Babel. He is going to rescue his rebellious, fractured world through Abraham's family. This family will eventually become the nation of Israel, and they're tasked with being a kingdom of priests to show the pagan nations who the true creator really is.
And as we know from reading the rest of the Bible, this promise ultimately points to a specific descendant, a messianic king who will restore the garden blessing to the entire globe. But, if you are Abraham just standing in the dirt in Genesis 12, you don't see any of that. You just have an invisible promise. And the reality of how Abraham handled that promise is incredibly messy.
Oh, it's one of the most compelling aspects of the text, because if you were inventing a religion to legitimize your culture, you would definitely edit out the flaws of your patriarch.
Absolutely. You'd make him a superhero.
Right. But Genesis leaves them all in. Abraham, the father of our faith, repeatedly puts God's promise in absolute jeopardy because of his own fear and lack of trust.
Like, look at what he does in Egypt. There is a famine, so Abraham goes down to Egypt. He realizes his wife, Sarah, is beautiful, and he becomes terrified that the Pharaoh will kill him just to take her. So instead of trusting the God who just promised to make him a great nation, Abraham lies. He says, "She is my sister."
He essentially hands his wife over to a pagan king to save his own skin.
Yes. And the crazy part is, he pulls the exact same stunt years later with another king, Abimelech.
It's an agonizing failure of leadership and faith, and it creates monumental trauma in his family. But the failures aren't just rooted in fear, they're also rooted in impatience. God promised them a family, but years turn into decades, and Abraham and Sarah remain childless. They are far beyond childbearing years. The biological impossibility is just staring them in the face every single day.
Think about the psychology of that waiting. You have a promise from God, but the timeline makes zero sense to you. So doubt creeps in. They start to think, maybe God needs our help to pull this off. Maybe we need to force the outcome.
Right, yeah.
It is the exact same temptation from the garden seizing autonomy. So Sarah tells Abraham to sleep with her Egyptian servant Hagar to produce an heir.
And Abraham listens to the voice of his wife over the promise of God, perfectly echoing Adam in the garden. He sleeps with Hagar, and she conceives a son, Ishmael. But this manufactured solution creates an incredible toxic family dynamic. It breeds intense jealousy, abuse, division. Hagar and Ishmael end up cast out into the desert. It is a total disaster born out of refusing to trust God's timeline.
This is where I have to pause and look at this from God's perspective. If I am God and I watch the guy I chose lie about his wife twice and then sleep with a servant girl because he doesn't trust my word, I am seriously reconsidering my choices. I'm thinking, Abraham is a liability. I need to scrap this and find someone with a better moral track record.
Right, time to pivot.
Yeah. Why on earth does God stick with him?
Because God's covenant isn't predicated on Abraham's perfection. It is predicated on God's own unyielding faithfulness. God uses flawed people to demonstrate that the rescue of humanity relies entirely on his grace, not human effort. When Abraham doubts, God doesn't walk away. Instead, he leans in and formalizes the promise through a covenant, which we see brilliantly displayed in Genesis 15.
Genesis 15 is one of the most vital chapters in the Bible. God takes this elderly, doubting man outside in the dead of night and says, "Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be." And despite all his failures, the text says Abraham simply believed the Lord, and God credited it to him as righteousness.
But then God does something profoundly strange to our modern sensibilities to guarantee that promise. He tells Abraham to bring a heifer, a goat, and a ram, cut them in half, and arrange the halves opposite each other on the ground.
Sounds like a horror movie. But you really have to explain the mechanics of an ancient Near Eastern covenant to understand the beauty of this.
Yeah, in the ancient world, this was how kings made treaties. It was called a suzerain vassal treaty. The two parties would cut animals in half, creating this pathway of blood in the dirt. Then they would walk between the severed pieces together. It was a graphic, self-maledictory oath. They were essentially saying, "May what happened to these animals happen to me if I break the terms of this covenant." It was a promise of death for unfaithfulness.
But the twist in Genesis 15 is what happens next. A thick, terrifying darkness falls over Abraham. And then a smoking firepot and a blazing torch, which represent the presence of God, appear.
And the presence of God passes between the severed animal pieces. But Abraham does not. God puts Abraham to sleep. God walks the path of blood entirely alone.
The theological weight of that is just staggering. God is making a unilateral promise. He is saying, "I will keep my end of the covenant. And Abraham, when you and your descendants inevitably fail to keep your end of the covenant, I will take the curse of the severed animals upon myself. I will pay the price for your failure."
It points directly to the cross. It points directly to the wounded victor of Genesis 3.15, taking the curse of human rebellion upon himself to save the family. And to ensure they never forget this reliance on God, God gives Abraham a physical sign in chapter 17, circumcision. It is a permanent, intimate reminder that their legacy, their fruitfulness, and their future do not come from their own physical capability or their scheming, but purely from the miraculous provision of God.
And God delivers. Against all biological odds, Sarah gives birth to Isaac. The promise is secured. But the ultimate test of a covenant isn't how it works with the founder, it's whether it can survive the next generation. We watch the blessing pass from Abraham to Isaac, and then from Isaac to his son Jacob. And man, if you thought Abraham had issues with autonomy, Jacob turns deception into an absolute art form.
Oh, Jacob is a fascinating, frustrating psychological study. His name literally translates to "he grasps the heel," which became an idiom for a deceiver or a supplanter. And he spends the first half of his life living up to that name relentlessly. He is consumed by ambition to secure the family blessing and birthright, but he totally refuses to trust God for it.
He exploits his older brother Esau's physical hunger, manipulating him into trading his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. And then he orchestrates this elaborate, incredibly cruel deception against his own father.
Yeah, Isaac is old and blind, and he's preparing to give the patriarchal blessing to his favorite son, Esau. Jacob, with the help of his mother, puts on Esau's clothes. He ties goat skins to his arms and neck so that when his blind father reaches out to touch him, he will feel hairy like his brother. He goes in, lies directly to his father's face, invokes the name of God in his lie, and steals the blessing.
It is domestic terrorism. It shatters the family entirely. Esau vows to murder him, and Jacob is forced to flee for his life, leaving behind everything he just schemed to inherit. He runs to his uncle Laban's territory. But the deceiver is about to get a massive dose of his own medicine.
Laban is a master manipulator. Jacob falls in love with Laban's younger daughter, Rachel, and he agrees to work 7 hard years to marry her. But on the wedding night, under the cover of darkness and heavy veils, Laban swaps in his older daughter, Leah. Jacob wakes up the next morning married to the wrong woman.
Just brutal.
And Laban essentially tells him, we don't give the younger before the older around here. It's a vicious, poetic payback for Jacob stealing his older brother's blessing.
So Jacob has to work another 7 years for Rachel. He ends up with multiple wives, creating this deeply fractured, rivalrous, toxic household. It is a masterclass in how sin and deception just breed more sin and deception. But God uses these decades of hardship under Laban to slowly break down Jacob's self-reliance.
It culminates in Genesis 32. Jacob is finally returning to his homeland. He has heard that Esau is riding out to meet him with 400 men. Jacob is terrified that he and his entire family are about to be slaughtered. He sends everyone across the river Jabbok, and he is left entirely alone in the darkness.
And out of the darkness, a mysterious figure attacks him. They wrestle violently in the dirt until daybreak.
The prophet Hosea later confirms that Jacob was wrestling with a manifestation of God himself. During the struggle, God touches Jacob's hip socket, wrenching it out of joint. Jacob is crippled, he can no longer fight, and he can no longer run. All he can do is cling. He clings to this divine figure and says, I will not let you go unless you bless me.
It is the defining moment of his life. Even now, he is desperate for a blessing. But the posture has completely changed. He isn't dressing up in goatskins to trick a blind man anymore. He's broken, clinging to God in desperate dependence.
And God responds by asking him a question. What is your name? For the first time in his life, Jacob has to confess his true identity. My name is Jacob, deceiver. And God says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome.
Israel. It means wrestles with God. This entire family, this whole nation, will forever be known not as the people who get everything right, but as the people who wrestle with God in the dark and cling to him for survival.
So Jacob, now Israel, has 12 sons. You would hope that after such a profound humbling, the family dynamics would heal. But trauma is generational. Jacob repeats the sins of his parents. He blatantly favors his second youngest son, Joseph, over all the others, just as he was favored by his mother.
He gives Joseph an ornate, highly decorated coat. And this isn't just a fashion statement. It is a massive status symbol. It tells the 10 older brothers, you are the laborers, but this kid is the manager. He is getting the inheritance.
And Joseph doesn't really help the situation.
No, he doesn't.
He has these dreams where his brothers' sheaves of grain bow down to his, and he just gleefully shares these dreams with his family. The hatred stews until it turns murderous.
The brothers are out tending flocks, and Jacob sends Joseph to check on them. They see him coming from a distance in that coat, and they plot to kill him. They strip him of the coat and throw him into a dry cistern. But at the last second, Judah suggests they can make a profit instead. So they sell their own flesh and blood to a passing caravan of Ishmaelites, condemning him to Egyptian slavery. And the cover-up is just brutal. They dip that beautiful coat in goat's blood, take it back to their father, and let Jacob conclude that a wild animal tore his favorite son to pieces. Jacob refuses to be comforted. The family is utterly destroyed. If you are reading this for the first time, you are thinking, how can God's rescue plan for the world possibly survive this level of dysfunction and malice?
But this is where the literary and theological mastery of Genesis reaches its absolute zenith. The narrative shifts to Egypt. What the brothers intended as a permanent burial, God is using as a mechanism for deliverance. Joseph is a slave in the house of Potiphar, an Egyptian official. And the text repeats this vital phrase, the Lord was with Joseph.
Joseph acts with integrity, but he is falsely accused of assault by Potiphar's wife and thrown into a royal dungeon. He languishes there for years. It is a descent into absolute darkness. But even in the prison, the Lord is with him. Joseph interprets the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, demonstrating that true interpretation belongs to God, not Egyptian magic.
And this specific skill eventually lands him in front of Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh has terrifying dreams about 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 gaunt cows. Joseph, empowered by God, interprets the dream. Egypt is about to experience 7 years of unprecedented abundance, followed by 7 years of catastrophic, world-ending famine.
And Pharaoh is so struck by the Spirit of God in Joseph, the position of vizier second in command over the entire Egyptian empire. Joseph implements a massive agricultural strategy, storing up grain during the good years.
Then the famine hits, and its severity reaches all the way back to Canaan. Jacob and his family are starving, so Jacob sends 10 of his sons down to Egypt to buy grain. They walk into an Egyptian administrative hall and they bow face down to the ground before the vizier of Egypt, completely oblivious that they are bowing to the brother they sold into slavery decades earlier.
The childhood dream is fulfilled. Joseph has absolute power over them. He could execute them on the spot. He could enact the vengeance of Lamech right then and there. But instead, he puts them through a long, agonizing psychological test. He accuses them of being spies. He locks them up. He demands they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, back to Egypt.
Some readers see Joseph as being cruel here, but you really have to look at the mechanics of the test. Joseph is trying to figure out if these are the exact same men who threw him in a pit. Rachel, Joseph's mother, only had 2 sons. Joseph and Benjamin, the brothers, disposed of Joseph. Now, Joseph sets up a scenario where they have the perfect opportunity to abandon Benjamin to slavery in Egypt in order to save their own skins. He frames Benjamin for stealing a silver cup.
It is the ultimate pressure cooker. The Egyptian guards find the cup in Benjamin's sack.
Yeah.
The punishment is slavery. The brothers can walk away free, go back to their father and say, well, we lost another one. But they don't. They tear their clothes. They go back to Joseph. And Judah, the exact same brother who originally suggested selling Joseph into slavery, steps forward.
Judah's speech in Genesis 44 is one of the most moving pieces of literature in the ancient world. He tells Joseph that if they return without Benjamin, the grief will literally kill their father. And then Judah offers himself as a substitute. He says, let me remain here as your slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers.
It is a complete character transformation. Judah offers substitutionary atonement. He lays down his life to save his brother and his father. When Joseph sees this genuine repentance, he can't hold it in anymore. He clears the room, breaks down weeping, and reveals his identity. I am Joseph. Is my father still living?
The brothers are terrified, expecting immediate execution. But Joseph utters the defining thesis statement of the entire book of Genesis. In chapter 50, verse 20, he looks at his brothers and says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives.
You intended it for evil, but God intended it for good. It is the summary of human history since the Garden of Eden. We grasp for autonomy, we betray each other, we intend evil. But God's sovereignty is so massive, so intricate, that he can take the raw material of our rebellion, subvert it, and weave it into his grand design to bring about salvation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, he refuses to let the chaos win. And as we look at the culmination of this story, we have to trace that promise back to Genesis 3, the promise of the wounded victor who would crush the snake. As Jacob is on his deathbed in Egypt, he calls his 12 sons to give them a final prophetic blessing.
When he gets to Judah, the brother who offered his life as a substitute, he prophesies something that alters the course of the Bible. In Genesis 49, Jacob says that the scepter will not depart from Judah. He prophesies that from Judah's line will come a royal king, a leader who will command the obedience of the nations and restore the abundance of the garden to the world.
It is the promise of the Messiah. If you trace the genealogies through the rest of the Bible, this promise narrows down from Judah to King David and ultimately to a carpenter in Nazareth. The New Testament authors explicitly identify Jesus as this promised king from the line of Judah.
Jesus is the ultimate wounded victor from Genesis 3:15. On the cross, he offered himself as the ultimate substitutionary atonement, just as Judah foreshadowed. He was wounded. His heel was struck by the forces of evil and death, but through his resurrection, he crushed the head of the snake. He defeated sin and death at its root, inaugurating the new creation that God promised in the garden.
The entire book of Genesis is a masterfully woven tapestry pointing forward to this ultimate rescue. It shows us that God doesn't run away from human dysfunction. He enters into it. He works through deeply flawed, failing people like Abraham, Jacob, and Judah to accomplish a redemption that spans the cosmos.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for us today. When we read Genesis, we aren't just analyzing ancient Near Eastern history. We are looking in a mirror. We see our own daily desires to ignore the manual, to define good and evil for ourselves, and to orchestrate our own outcomes out of fear. But more importantly, we see the relentless, staggering faithfulness of the God we serve.
We see a God who can take the absolute worst circumstances of your life, the betrayals, the pits, the unfair accusations, and weave them into a narrative of grace and preservation. That is a foundation you can actually build your life upon.
But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on this week. Think about the closing image of the book of Genesis. Yes, Joseph has saved his family. They are reconciled, they are fed, and they are protected. But look at their geographic location. They are in Egypt. They are not in Canaan, the land God promised to Abraham.
They are living in exile. They are sustained by grace, but they are living in a pagan empire waiting for the ultimate fulfillment of the promise. Genesis literally ends with a coffin in Egypt. Joseph dies with a promise hanging in the air, telling his brothers, God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
It's an unresolved, lingering chord. It forces us to ask ourselves a hard question. In our own modern everyday lives, where are we currently settling in Egypt? Where are we waiting on a promise from God in the midst of a culture that is not our true home? And how can we learn to trust that his timeline, even when it spans generations, even when it requires us to wait in the dark, is perfectly orchestrated for our ultimate good? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this encourages you to open the first pages of your Bible this week and look at that ancient foundation with entirely fresh eyes. Keep trusting the manual, keep cultivating the goodness around you, and we will see you on the next deep dive.